Greetings and welcome to Right Now, a weekly program about writers and how and why they do what they do. Each week we showcase a different local, regional, or national writer, people who are your neighbors, your friends, and who have something to say. I'm Judy Campbell. I'm a mystery writer and a poet from Plymouth, and I'm absolutely and totally in love with words, and I want to know more about the people who create with them. So welcome to you all, and stay tuned, because at the end of the program, you'll have a chance to write something and be part of a future program, so stay tuned. Now, my guest today is Pamela Kelley, who is not only a wonderful mystery and romance writer, but she's also my neighbor. Welcome, Pamela.
Thanks.
Welcome, Pamela. Tell us a little bit about Married in Montana, 6 months in Montana, sorry, 6 months in Montana. That was your first book. Tell us about that.
It was my first book, and the original title was Married in Montana.
That's why I messed it up.
So that might be why you're thinking of it. And then I found out that Married in Montana, there's 4 or 5 other books that have the same title, so I needed to change it. And the title change came about because this is a marriage of convenience story. And I had a lot of fun with that. There was a grandfather, loosely modeled after my grandfather, who was playing matchmaker, and he had a grandson who was in no hurry to get married and was just all focused on work. And so he, a chance meeting with a childhood friend who was home visiting, hadn't been there for years, bumped into the grandfather and got the wheels turning, and so he put a condition in his will that said that when he passed on, the only way that Christian, his grandson, would inherit the family business would be if he marries Molly and they stay married for 6 months. After the 6 months, they can go their separate ways. But he was betting on the fact that he might want to stick around. So that's where the title came from.
Why Montana?
Montana came about, I've actually never been there, but one of my best friends at the age of 38 had been there, had visited friends, fell in love with the area, and just felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. And she was single, and she just decided to try it. So she packed up, she moved out there, and everything fell into place for her. She got a job right away. One of the things that she loves about Montana is the outdoors. She loves to hike and to kayak. So she really didn't know anybody there except for a friend that lived hours away. Mm-hmm. So she bought a kayak, joined a kayak club, met a boy, and they ended up getting married.
The rest is history.
The rest is history, yeah. So I thought, it seems like a romantic setting.
Okay, so how do you do your research? Because we write what you know, but you don't live in Montana. So how do you do your scene setting in your book?
A lot of what I do is I've read a lot of books that are set in Montana.
Okay.
I'm a total geek, so I do a lot of internet research, armchair traveler. But I also had my friend that lives there read over the draft, just to make sure that I wasn't, really blowing something. And she caught, for instance, I'm a foodie, and I just assumed that there had to be a Whole Foods in Bozeman. And she's like, oh, no. You can't put that. So things like that she caught for me.
That's really good. But this is the first, and you've written a second one. We're going to ask you to read from this in a few minutes.
Okay.
But you've written a second one in this series. Our Pamela is a very, very prolific writer. She amazes me. But anyway, so this is the first in the series, and the second one is out and available.
The second one just came out a couple weeks ago, and that one, I'm still kind of learning my way how to plan things, and I thought that I would be speedier than I was. The original plan, this book came out around Thanksgiving. The original plan was to have the second book out around Christmas.
She writes very quickly, too.
And so it has a Christmas theme. It's called Mistletoe in Montana. And it did not come out around Christmas. It just came out a couple weeks ago.
Okay, mistletoe in Easter in Montana.
Exactly. But it follows 2 characters that we first meet in this book.
Okay.
So I had a lot of fun with that.
Keep talking. Why don't you read us a little bit about from your first book, 6 months in Montana?
So I'll just read the opening scene then.
That would be, give us a couple of pages, yes.
Okay. This is a joke, right? Christian Ford looked at his lawyer and best friend Travis Jones in disbelief. Now he understood why Travis had insisted that he come by his office for an official reading of his grandfather's will. Are you seriously telling me that he changed his will less than a month before he died and added this condition? I'd love to tell you I'm kidding, but your grandfather was very clear about what he wanted, Travis added. I tried to talk him out of it, told him you haven't even seen her in years, but he was insistent, said he ran into her at the market last month. She was home for a quick visit, and they got to chatting. Doesn't she live in New York City now? Christian hadn't seen or thought of Molly in years. She does, works for one of the local hotel chains. Sounds like she's done pretty well, too. So this makes absolutely no sense then. Her life isn't here. Christian glanced around the office, not really seeing the varnished dark wood bookcases or the view out of the window behind Travis, which overlooked Main Street in Beauville, Montana, a small town just outside Bozeman. Main Street served as the center of town, and most of its small shops and businesses were along this stretch. Your grandfather seemed to think she'd be better off here. It's absolutely ridiculous. She'll never agree to it. Why would she? Travis leaned back in his plush leather chair and picked up the will, shuffling the pages until he found the passage he was looking for. Well, you just have to stay married for 6 months. She'll be free to go after that if she wishes, and it might be worth her while. Have you called her yet? Christian was having a hard time wrapping his head around this. His grandfather had always marched to his own drum and had plenty of ideas about how Christian should do things, but he'd never meddled to this extreme before. I spoke with her briefly yesterday. She's on her way here, meeting us in an hour at Delancey's. We're not meeting here in the office? Delancey's was the best restaurant in the area. Given the situation, I thought the least we could do is buy her dinner.
Oh, all right, and then it takes off from there. What got you started in romance?
I read romance, I read mystery, I read everything. And, for years I gobbled up all the Harlequin romances. I used to get them at Annie's bookstore, where you could buy all the used ones for like $0.25. And I would just inhale them. And I still read them. I pick them up in Stop and Shop. So I read those. I read, James Patterson, John Grisham. I read everything. But I really like a book that you can just curl up and easily read, and then a couple hours of entertainment, and then you're done.
Well, I curled up with it, and I absolutely loved it, and I'm not a romance reader at all, and yet I found myself wanting to follow the characters and hoping things would work out, so you certainly accomplished your mission. When did you start writing?
Oh gosh, probably in high school. I always wrote a little bit in journals and things like that, but then I took a creative writing class in high school and just had an absolute blast with it. And I was lucky. I have had wonderful teachers along the way that really encouraged me, and just have kind of dabbled with it over the years.
Yeah, that's one. So when did you actually start writing this series? When did you get serious? So you've written a lot. When did you get serious?
Okay, so
because yours is a different approach than a lot of writers I know. I have to say that. So.
I've been writing for a number of years.
That's what you told me.
Where I first kind of got serious about writing was when my mom passed away, and that was in 2002.
Okay.
And it was something I'd always talked about, and I had never really done. I always knew I wanted to do it, but it just wasn't the right time.
Yep.
And then, when something like that happens, it makes you take stock and think, okay, life is short. Maybe I should focus on the things that I am passionate about. So I joined Romance Writers of America, and it's not just romance writing, it supports all writing. And for a new writer, it was wonderful. All kinds of workshops and things to think about, structure and stuff like that. And so I started writing, and I got about maybe 5 or 6 different projects that I got 100 pages in.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'd be all excited, and I'd get to 100 pages, and then I would stop, and I'd be like, okay, what was I thinking? This is just awful. And I'd put it aside, and then I wouldn't write for a while. And that went on for years. And then I think I tried a couple years in a row, there's something called NaNoWriMo, which is the National November Writers Month. And what you do is writers from all over the world log on, and the goal is to write a novel, which they classify that as 50,000 words of something. And it could just be, it was a dark, stormy night, written 50,000 times. It can be whatever you want. You just get to that length.
Yep.
And so I tried that.
NaNoWriMo.
NaNoWriMo, it's free, you
Yep.
know, and it's a wonderful supportive organization. They
It's
have
a website you can go on
It's
to.
a website.
Okay.
It's every November they do it.
Every November.
And there's like local groups that meet up, like we met
Yep.
at the Plymouth Library and cheered each other on. And so I did it a couple times, and you know, a goal like that where it's a lot of writing in a short period of time can either push you or freeze you. And the first couple times I tried that, it froze me. You know, I just couldn't do it.
Did you stop halfway through, or did you keep on going?
I stopped halfway through. Just,
Yep.
you know, it was just like, oh my God, I'm so far behind, I'll
Yep.
never catch up.
Okay, okay.
But then I was just in a different place, and in 2009 or 10, I forget which year,
Okay.
I had this story I'd been thinking about for a long time.
This one?
No.
Oh.
This was not the first book I wrote.
Okay.
It's the first book I published.
All right.
The first book I actually wrote and finished was my mystery, which is Trust.
Which I've
And
also read.
I had taken a class years ago in forensic psychology where they looked at, it was just this case we looked at where they looked at these teenagers that were coerced into giving a false confession. And that just fascinated me. And it was kind of a landmark case. And I looked at what's allowed and how far can you push somebody. You can lie to them to get them to confess. You can withhold food. You can just keep going until they're so tired that finally you break them down and they just say, I did it, just let me go home.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what happened with these teenagers. And that idea kind of stayed with me. I'm like, oh, what if I had this character that, you know, she confessed to something and then charges were dropped. And then years later, something else happens and she's accused of something, and then the past is brought up, so she looks extra guilty. And so I kind of had that idea that I was noodling around for a long time. So by the time the November rolled around, the national, you know, the NaNoWriMo, I kind of had the story up in my head. You know, it wasn't plotted out, but I had a good sense of what it was.
Yep.
So I just said, I'm going to do it this time. So I forced myself every day to write. You know, to get to your goal, you have to write 1,700 something words a day.
Okay.
And so every morning I got up and I got my words down and I finished, and then decided it was absolutely awful and set it aside.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And then, but I kept
Not
going.
uncommon, by the way. A lot of us get to the midpoint and say, what was I thinking?
Well,
and then
I wasn't
pick it back
quite,
up.
I wasn't quite finished. I
Yep.
had gotten, maybe I got my 50,000 words, but I still hadn't figured out who did it.
Yep.
At that point, I didn't know who the murderer was, so I needed to figure that out.
Yeah.
So I had like another 5,000 or 10,000
Yeah.
words to go and to edit and all that. And I just set it aside, and then I came back to it and played with it and finally figured it out, finished it, still was just not 100% sure that it was good enough.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll just write another book. So I wrote that one. And I wrote that one very quickly. I probably wrote that one in about a month.
You're going to make our viewers very uncomfortable. She is not the norm, but she is a really good, really fast writer. But remember, I'm going to jump in here for 1 second, that some of us write all the time at the computer and we do drafts and we throw them out. Others of us think, and this story is noodling around in the back of the gray matter, but so that by the time you sit down, it just kind of blasts itself right out.
Yeah, because you're still actually working on it. Your
Always.
subconscious is working on it.
You never stop
You know,
working
and
on it.
everybody has their different way of doing things.
Yeah.
I tried, on the book I just finished, I tried to plot it out ahead of time. I was on a plane going to a conference, and I was
This is a good storyteller.
I was halfway done with the book, and I decided, well, I'm running behind. I'm going to just plot out the rest, and then it'll just be a jiffy. So I plotted out the rest, what I thought should happen, and then I was completely stuck and frozen for another couple of weeks because I didn't like what I'd plotted out. So I finally had to just toss it and just ignore it completely. And then I learned that I am not someone who can plot. I can have a basic idea of the story, and then I just kind of have to let it just go and let it organically work
Yep.
itself out.
Yep.
And for me, it comes out better that way.
Now, which one was that? Was that the...
That's the one I just released.
And that's Mistletoe?
Mistletoe in Montana.
Mistletoe. First in the Montana series is Married in Montana.
6 months in Montana.
I'm not doing well. 6 months in Montana.
And
Read
then
this-
the mystery, which is Trust.
So that came out next, Trust.
Yep.
And then Mistletoe,
Mistletoe in Montana.
Montana is number 2 in that series.
In this series.
Are you going to have a mystery series as well?
Yes, there's going to be a spin-off to Trust.
Okay.
So there's going to be, in that book, there's also a grandfather. All my books seem to have grandfather characters. But there's a grandfather who's a retired sheriff, and he's super popular with people that have read that book. So he is spinning off to what's going to be a new series called Motive is the first book.
Okay.
In the same setting, same feel.
Will he be the sleuth?
No, he'll be the advisor, kind of like he was in Trust.
Okay, okay.
His granddaughter, who was working for a big law firm in Boston, and she's really good at computers, and she has this knack of investigating. So she's one of those investigators that helps law firms, but she gets into this case. This is before the book starts. She gets into this case where she almost gets killed, and that just really scares her. And she's like, you know what? I want to step back. So her passion that she loves to do is cook. So she escapes to Waverly, and she opens up Comfort and Joy, which is a little comfort food takeout shop.
Yep.
And she's trying not to even think about crime and investigating. But then she meets the hot sheriff who discovers her talents, and a case comes along, and he's like, well, maybe you can help me a little bit with this.
Nice premise.
Yeah, so it's a
Nice
lot of
premise.
fun.
So you can get, I know you said earlier you're a foodie. So, and I know that from walking through the entryway and smelling some of the things you cook. So you get your interest and love of food in both of these, because I know it's in this one. And do you put recipes in as well? Is that something you're going to do?
Recipe, yeah, I put a recipe so far in all the books.
Very good.
One recipe.
What's in this one? What's
This
in
one
6 months
is-
in Montana? I did it right.
This one is actually local Plymouth people might like. It's a lobster casserole recipe.
Oh.
And it's the easiest thing in the world. It's a family tradition that's, every Christmas Eve. On my sister's side of the family, it's very Italian, and they do a traditional Italian feast. And they always have the lobster casserole. And I've also grown up on the Cape working in restaurants, and this is kind of the way a lot of the stuffings on the Cape are made. So it's as simple as crushed up Ritz crackers.
Famous Ritz cracker stuffing, absolutely.
Butter, a little bit of lemon. You toss it with the seafood, you bake it. That's it.
Keep this up. We're going to end the show right now, and I'm going to go off and make you cook it for me.
Yeah. So, I had a lot of fun with that, too.
Oh, wow. So what's the recipe in Trust?
In Trust, the recipe is a recipe that I actually created through trial and error. I had a winter where I was braising up a storm, and I made a million different recipes
You want to explain what braising is?
Braising is when you make short ribs or pot roast. It's a method of cooking where you cook long and slow. You throw everything in a pot with some aromatics, seasonings, and some broth or wine, and you just let it go for a couple of hours until the meat falls off the bone and it's super tender. So I just, through tinkering, came up with this recipe that super easy. I think it has maybe 5 ingredients. Throw it all in a pot, let it go, and it's delicious.
And mistletoe in Montana, is that a seasonal recipe, or is that
I'm
a
not
recipe?
actually, mistletoe, I don't think I actually put one in. I talk about food a little bit throughout the book, but I don't think I put one in that book, actually.
Okay. I want to talk about your publishing process, because you are primarily, you're independently published, and you're mostly published electronically.
Right.
Tell me why you chose to publish independently, because your books are good, anybody could have picked them up, but you made a choice.
I did, and it's interesting. If you had asked me 3 or 4 years ago if I would ever self-publish, I would have said absolutely not.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. Independent publishing is the new self-publishing, and independent publishing is completely, absolutely respectable. And I know exactly what you're saying, because in my writing classes, I talk about that it is completely legitimate and respected to publish independently now. There's awards, there's all kinds of organizations for independent publishers. Right. So tell us more why you chose that.
Okay, it didn't used to be.
I know.
And things have changed so much because of the ability to publish directly on Amazon and Kobo and Apple and Barnes & Noble. That didn't exist. Back in 2002, when I joined Romance Writers of America, the goal was you get an agent, you get published by Harlequin or Random House or one of the big publishers, and you don't care what they offer you, you take it, and you're happy to take it.
And they run you.
And they run you.
Own you. Yeah.
And it's changed because, because I've been so slow. In some ways you think I'm fast, but in a lot of ways I'm very slow, because I wrote Trust 3 years ago. And then during that time I'm such a geek, and I've been analyzing and I've been studying the market, and I've been seeing what some of my friends, I have a very good friend, Marie Force, who was published by a small press. She writes romance. And then she tried to get published by a big press, and she didn't get picked up. She got picked up by the ebook only arm of Harlequin, which is Carina.
Didn't even know they had that.
Yep, they have that.
Ooh.
And then she started a new series, a romance series, and had her agent send it out everywhere, and it didn't get picked up. So she said, this whole new thing had just come about with Amazon. And she said, well, I'm going to just do it myself then, just see what happens. We'll still keep going the traditional route.
Yeah.
So she put her book up there, and she's now, interestingly, gone the opposite way. She's hugely successful doing it on her own. Like, she's sold crazy, like, I want to say maybe 3 million books. Crazy, crazy. New York Times bestseller. All her books go to the list. She's got all the control. But she also signed a deal with a big publisher about a year ago for a new series. So she's now what we call a hybrid, and this is something that you're going to be seeing a lot of. People that independently publish, get established, do well, and then they go to a traditional publisher, because then they have a lot more leverage.
Got a platform. Yep.
They have a platform.
Yep.
So she has this new series that is a romance series set in Vermont, and it's come out through Berkeley. And now Harlequin, who just did the ebook only, is now bringing out those books in print.
I'm going to have to wind us down a little bit here. First of all, tell our audience where we can get your books.
You can get my books at Amazon.com for the Kindle,
Yep.
at Barnes & Noble for the Nook, at Kobo for the Kobo device, and at iTunes for Apple. And you can also, through Barnes & Noble or Amazon, you can also buy the print book.
You can get print copies if you're a print copy person. Right. Okay. I'm going to interrupt us for one quick second and go back to where I started with our little writing game, our writing challenge. This week's writing challenge is we're going to give you a phrase, and it is the beginning of your novel, your children's story, your mystery, your sci-fi. In writing, we're told that we have 19 words to grab and hold, to hook a reader. So I'm going to give you a phrase, and I'd like you to write in 75 words or less the beginning of your novel. Is it your mystery? What is it? Mail it to me, email it to me at revdocmystery@gmail.com, revdocmystery, with the tagline Montana, because of our guest. The opening line is, Montana, what was I thinking? You take that and turn it into the first paragraph, 75 words or less, of your novel. Send it to me with the tagline Montana in the email to RevDocMystery. And if we pick your selection, we'll give you a shout out on the program and read your selection. Now back to you, Pamela Kelley. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered in this all too brief time talking? Is there anything what would you like your readers to take away from your books? You said a good read, take you out of yourself for a little bit. Is there anything you'd like to add to that besides the recipes? She offers a lot.
Yeah, I guess if I had to, tell people what my books are like, they are nice, easy reads, the kind of book that you can just curl up with. They're set mostly in small towns. They're not violent. They are I guess gentle reads. Yep.
No great purple passages.
No, yeah.
Address the part.
But I'd say probably if people like books by Debbie Macomber or Danielle Steele, they might have that kind of a feel to them.
Okay. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. You're an extremely exciting author and a wonderful neighbor. I mean, I come from the inside out on this one because I've read your books, and whenever we met, and we live in a condominium on Whitehorse Beach, we stood I'm wrapping up. We introduced each other, and we both said, we're writers. So Pamela Kelley, thank you. Keep writing. You're a star.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Right now.